Okay, we are going to continue our study of manual motor controls. We've already had a lesson on contact blocks, and that's the fundamental beginning to us having some sort of input into a manual motor control circuit. What actually is going to be manipulating those contact blocks is operators. So now we're going to have a lesson on operators. In this lesson, we're going to have some objectives. We're going to define an operator. We're going to list 4 basic types of operators. And we're going to describe the basic function of each operator type. So what is an operator? I'm showing the most common version here being a push button. But an operator is a mechanical device when activated changes the state of one or more contact blocks. Let's look at the types of operators. We can have a push button as an operator. The push button can be momentary, meaning if you press it and release it, it's going to go back to its original state. Or it could be latching, where you press it and release it and it stays in that depressed state. We're going to have a selector switch. We can have a 2-position selector switch, and that 2-position selector switch can either maintain the position that we change it, or it can have a spring return, much like a starting key on an older version car. And another version of a selector switch is a 3-position selector switch. So let's look at each one of these. A momentary push button. Momentary push button is a mechanical device that when pressed momentarily changes the state of one or more contact blocks that are associated with it. Now momentarily means as soon as we let go, it's going to go back to its non-pressed state, and it's no longer going to be activating on those contact blocks. So the contact blocks, when it's not depressed, will return to their shelf state. Let's look at how we can utilize this with our contact block to give us a couple different options for these push buttons. These are momentary push button examples. The one to the left is a normally open push button. A normally open push button not pressed means that that contact block is open. When pressed, the contact block changes from its shelf state to its active state, which would be closing the switch, so that contact block would close. Of course, because it's a momentary push button, when we release that push button, that contact block will go back to its shelf state, and in this case, it would open back up. Let's look at the right-hand side. It is a normally closed push button example, and when the button is not pressed, the contact block associated with it is going to be closed. If we depress that button, while it's being pressed, that contact block opens up. Again, it's momentary, so when we release that momentary action on that push button, the contact block will go back to its shelf state. In this case, it's a normally closed contact block, and the switch would again close. Let's look at some varieties of these different push buttons. This one here is from C3 Controls. It is an illuminated push button, so not only is it a push button, it also has a light. So that would illuminate an amber color. So if it's in a darker environment, it would be easier to see. This is one by the German company Schmersel. We saw a contact block by Schmersel, and it would actually be attached to this particular operator to be able to manipulate that contact block with the press of a button. And then this is one by Allen Bradley. The buttons can have a variety of colors. This one happens to be blue, and the buttons can even have the action that button's going to perform written right on the button. The other type of push button that we have is a latching push button. This one, when pressed, will change the state of one or more contact blocks, and they will stay in that changed state until it is unlatched. So in this particular button, if I press on it and I remove my hand, it's going to stay latched. and it will continue to hold those contact blocks in their non-shelf state or their active state until I unlatch that push button. And there's a couple different methods that we can implore to actually release that latch on that push button. We're going to look at that next. So latching push buttons. Most common use of a latching push button is an emergency stop. If you're at a production facility and something unsafe is happening, you go over and you hit that latching push button. You don't have to continue to hold it down to put everything in a safe state. You push it and you can leave the area because it is unsafe, and it will stay latched. And then when whatever the issue is resolved, you can come and unlatch that emergency stop push button, and the control system will go back to operation again. The most common form that the operator takes is what's called a mushroom head. There's going to be a reason for that when we talk about how we're going to unlatch those. But a mushroom head is that larger head. It's a little bit bigger than that push button that we saw in the previous example. I have a few pictures that we're going to look at here. The common operators are either push-pull or push-rotate. So the second word there, the pull, is going to deactivate that pressing action, and the rotate is, we'll have to rotate the actual knob to unlatch the push button. Here is a picture of a push-pull type, and you can kind of understand why it's a mushroom head. You literally have to grab onto something to pull the knob back out. And so that is an offering by Allen Bradley that is the push-pull model. And this is an Automation Direct emergency stop button that if we press it in, we have to rotate it to actually get it to unlatch itself. Now we're going to look at some selector switches. The first one we're going to look at is a 2-position selector switch. This one is a 2-position mechanical device that changes the state of one or more contact blocks in each position. The position can be maintained or spring returned. Okay, we're going to look at maintained versus spring returned here in a moment. But this particular picture only shows one contact block on there, but we can stack contact blocks on either side, so the different mechanical action that happens in a operator of this form factor will manipulate many contact blocks at the same time, and will give us different options that we have that we don't get from a push button. Here are the two different forms that it can take. A maintained selector switch, since we have 2 positions, we have an A or B as a generic term that we use for those. The A position, if we switch it over to the B position, and a maintained switch, if we let go, it's going to stay in the B position. We would have to expressly take it from the B position and force it back to the A position. For a spring returned 2-position selector switch, this is much like the starting key on a older version of a car. You put the key in the ignition, you rotate it to start. When you let go of the key, it rotates back at least to the on position, and it's no longer engaging the starter motor. That's how this spring return 2-position selector switch would work as well. If it's in the A position and we rotate it to the B position, as soon as we let go, it's going to move right back to the A position. Some examples of a 2-position selector switch, most commonly is just used for on-off, to turn a piece of equipment on and off. And this is what's called a legend plate that you can put on top of or around the selector switch, and it's going to denote which position is on and off. So in this case, the left selection would be off and the right selection would be on. Some other examples would be run, jog, and manual automatic. Now, these are some terms we haven't gotten into yet because we haven't talked about our control schemes. When we get to that, you'll just understand that we will be using a 2-position selector switch for those particular functions. And we have some bezel plates that you can buy for that denote which function is the left and which one is the right. Okay. Let's look at a 3-position selector switch. This one has an additional position. and an additional function. A three-position mechanical device that changes the state of one or more contact blocks in either the left or the right position. Okay, so again, we have a left and a right position, but we have the addition of a center position. When that selector switch is in the center position, none of the contact blocks are being activated. So in the center position, all contact blocks associated with this three-position selector switch will be in their shelf state. And the picture that I have here shows a great example of how we can stack these contact blocks on top of one another. So if you notice, we have two normally closed and two normally open contact blocks. For this three-position selector switch, if I rotate it to the left, we'll call that the A position for now. The two contact blocks, one normally closed and one normally open, on that side of the selector switch would be activated. They would change from their shelf state to their non-shelf state. The contact blocks to the right would not change state whatsoever, so they would still be at their shelf state. If I rotate from that A position back to that center position, that would take the left contact blocks out of their active state and return them to the shelf state. Of course, the ones on the right hand side would remain in their shelf state. So all four contact blocks would be in their shelf state at that particular time. If we rotate that selector switch to the right, we'll be activating those two contact blocks, one normally closed and one normally open, on the right hand side of that device. And the contact blocks on the left hand side will remain in their shelf state. Okay. Let's look at some examples of where we would use that three-position selector switch. It can be either maintained or spring returned, just like it was in the two-position selector switch. The most common use of this is a hand-off auto selection. Now this is when we're going to get quite a ways into our manual motor control theory that we're going to talk about this particular circuit, but when we get to that, you'll just understand that you'll need a three-position selector switch for that particular circuit, and that is a legend plate that we will use for that particular section. So if it's in the left selection, we will be in the hand mode. If it's in the center position, it'll be off, and if we're in the right selection, we'll be in the auto mode. Some other options that you could use a three-position selector switch for is forward off reverse or up off down, and I have a couple legend plates for those as well. But you know, the sky's the limit on what you can use this for. We just need to understand some basic functions and what we would actually use this for. Now let's review. Define an operator. An operator is a mechanical device that is going to actuate a contact block for us to be able to use that contact block's action to be able to control something. We want to list the four basic types of operators. We're going to have push buttons. They're either going to be momentary or latching. And we're going to have selector switches. They can either be two-position or three-position, as well as they can either be latching or maintaining. The function of each: a momentary push button can be used to momentarily cause an action, and when that button is no longer depressed, it will no longer take that action, where a latching push button will take that action and repeat that action until it is unlatched. A selector switch will either maintain a particular selection or momentarily make a particular selection based on the rotation of the actual selector switch itself.